Hello,
Hey.
everybody. We're back. I'm Brie Castellini, Seed&Spark's Film Community Manager.
And I'm Christina Raia, Seed&Spark's Head of Education.
And welcome back to another Lunch&Learn session. We'd first like to acknowledge that the land that we are all on is occupied territory, so please check the YouTube live comments feed or the video description if you're watching this on video on demand for a link to a First Nations COVID relief fund and a really amazing app that will tell you exactly whose land you are currently watching and learning from. And if you, for some reason, are here and are not familiar with Seed&Spark, well, we are a platform built to support creators by providing tools wherever you are on your journey, whether that's at the crowdfunding and education stage or all the way to creative distribution approaches. So welcome. Thanks again for joining us on our Wednesday sessions and for already sending us like a million questions for our crowdfunding AMA. So I guess we should just get started. We had a bunch of people submit on Twitter and on Instagram ahead of time, but we are watching the YouTube comments. So please, as things come up, ask us questions and we will answer anything. So the first question that was asked, I think, on the Seed&Spark Instagram was, what's the best way to build hype before a campaign launches?
I mean, there's a lot of things that you can do. I would say the best thing that you can do is just start talking about the thing, whether it's a film or an album or a comic book. Build some online presence for it. Start collecting emails of people that express interest in it. Some things that I've done, usually I create a hashtag for every project that I'm working on, especially if I'm planning to crowdfund, and just anything related to prep for it, I will post about it so that people start to get familiar with the title. They start to get excited about this thing that's coming. Something that Jerry Maravilla, who used to work at Seed&Spark and is a good friend of mine, something he did that was really effective for his feature was he shot like a test scene, and then he used social media for the film to ask people to subscribe to the newsletter for the film, and you only got to see the test scene if you subscribed to the newsletter. So it was like a really effective way to collect emails really fast and to incentivize people to do that.
Yeah, definitely. I also think that a lot of people consider marketing for their crowdfunding campaign and marketing for their film different concepts. And I don't think that that's right. I think that if you're planning on starting crowdfunding, you should already be marketing the film. Basically, don't crowdfund until you're ready to start consistently talking about your project. We keep saying film, but Seed&Spark is open to storytellers of all kinds. Plug. But we are filmmakers, so that's going to be what we default to. But yeah, as soon as you're ready to start talking about your project, and it doesn't have to be every day, but as long as you have something to say, some new information to drop once a month specifically about your project, then just start talking about it. Remember, this is something that, hopefully will come across in a lot of our answers and kind of speaks to a couple that I've seen already come in, but do not think about crowdfunding as asking for money. As soon as you do that, it becomes a chore that everyone hates, that you're going to hate, that your audience is going to hate. Think of it as sharing your passion, getting people excited about this thing that you're obsessed with, so obsessed with that you're going to start asking strangers for money. So like, if you're thinking about it in terms of, I want to get people excited about this project, then that can start whenever you start having stuff to share, storyboards, script snippets, casting announcements, production, design, meetings, location scouts, whatever. As soon as you're ready to start talking and sharing what a cool thing you're about to make, that's when you should start talking about it. And the more consistent you are about that, and the smarter you are about like getting people's direct contact info, like starting a newsletter like Jerry did, just starting an email list, social media account, whatever, the more effective that's going to be once you actually do launch.
Yeah, and just to kind of plug some stuff, we've done Lunch&Learns on building an email list, on social media, how to use it effectively for audience building. So definitely check out those past episodes.
Yes, definitely. I think we can drop a link to the playlists for all of the previous Lunch&Learns in chat now. So another question that came in through Instagram is paid media reach worth it? I assume that's like paid Facebook, boosted Facebook ads and stuff like that. I'm going to say no, the most part, like there's actually a really good YouTube video, not necessarily directly about this, but kind of about this, where a commentary YouTuber named Danny Gonzalez does a bunch of like AdSense testing. So he pays for 3 YouTube ads, and like the point of the video is like to make jokes about how weird Instagram mobile game apps are. And he's like, I wonder if these are actually effective advertisements. And so he does like 3 very strange little ads that he puts up on YouTube. He spends, I think, like $14,000 on paying for these ads, and like the actual click-through rate of this actual famous person with a lot of money and time on his hands got from his advertising is brutally low. So like if you think that it's going to be an effective strategy for you on the budget that you probably have to pay for it, it's not. Organic outreach, especially at this stage, is 100% always going to be a better way to go. It's slower, but you're actually going to get more return on investment for it.
Yeah, I mean, really think about your own behavior. Like, do you click ads really, or do you just scroll past them? Do you find yourself annoyed by them? Ads sometimes work on me to like stop and watch when it's really, really, really targeted, which we know, because like Facebook, Instagram, they're learning about our behavior, so they're extremely targeted. You don't know that same information about your audience to be able to be so targeted. But even then, I rarely click, right? I may watch, and so it's really not worth the amount of money you're going to spend when you're trying to make money.
Yeah, definitely not. It's just like merchandise. Advertising gets money at scale. Like if you can pay enough, you'll eventually turn a profit from it. But at the level at which I'm assuming most of us are at in this chat, it's not going to be worth it for you. It might seem useful. It's not. It really isn't. So question from Twitter, and then I'll hop over to YouTube comments for a little while. Question from Twitter that came in beforehand from Eric Ertz. Shout out Snobby Robot. Do you think the effects of the pandemic are going to help or hinder crowdfunding campaigns? I found IRL meetings incredibly useful in running past ones. So how do we do that now? It feels like an entirely new thing today than last year.
Yeah, it is an entirely new thing. Bree, do you want to talk a little bit about that? You wrote that blog post.
I did, yeah. So we'll almost certainly have this in the video description afterwards, and I think we can put it in the comments now. So it's a new thing, but not in the act of crowdfunding. Like there have always been people who have like primarily remotely produced, and then like come together for the actual production. So I don't think like the building of a campaign page is fundamentally structurally different than it was before. The things that you have to think about now are your ability to actually produce the thing you're fundraising for, and the ability of your audience to contribute. Because obviously, with the joblessness rate going up continuously and the continued economic uncertainty, not every community is going to have the same amount of money to spend on projects like this as before. So it's worth talking to people. Like as with everything, ask your audience. Christina and I can give you some good general advice, but at the end of the day, we don't know the particular audience that you're speaking to. Like I know my audience was hit pretty hard by COVID because I tend to make work for like younger people in the arts and freelancing gigs. And those were hit really, really hard by the pandemic, especially now that the unemployment boost expired and they're not making as much in unemployment anymore, but still aren't able to find regular jobs. So it very much does depend on who your audience is and what they're still spending money on if they are able to.
Yeah, like everything that we kind of come back to with all of these lessons is that there's no one size fits all with any of this, because it really is so specific to the project you're making and who that audience is for it.
Absolutely. Okay. Another question from Brima, who asks, how long should the teaser trailer be in the video? So I assume like the actual footage that you include in your pitch video. I would say no more than 30 seconds at the beginning, and then like sporadically throughout, either as B-roll or as like cutaways.
Yeah, I mean, the shorter you can make it, the better. We find that 15 to 20 seconds is kind of the point when people decide whether or not they're going to keep watching. And so you want them to understand that it's not just a trailer, but it is a pitch video, and that there's going to be more told here. But as Bree said, show, don't just tell. So the more B-roll you can cover what you're talking about with, the better.
Yeah, it should be a balance. But like the purpose of a teaser or trailer is distinct from the purpose of a pitch video. And you might think that you can just do one or the other, but you can't. They have totally different functions in marketing, in crowdfunding, and everything. So definitely check out a blog post about designing a great pitch video, which will give you an easy template to follow if you want a starting point. But as always, a template is a great place to start, but the more creative you can get with any best practices that you get from us or from, other educators around the internet, the better. The more unique you can make your campaign and the way that you talk about your project, the more successful you will be.
Also, you can totally have a full trailer to like supplement the pitch video.
Totally. They just shouldn't be the same thing.
Yep.
Yeah, and you don't have to include, I think some people think that they need to include everything in both the pitch video and the like initial crowdfunding campaign page, but like it's actually better to hold back some information and release it as like a milestone reward perhaps. So like maybe you'll show a little bit of your trailer, but say we'll release the full trailer once we hit 50% funded or something like that to like incentivize people to be giving and give them stuff to look forward to that isn't just the end of the campaign. You got to give people like mile markers to make them feel like they're making progress with you instead of all or nothing of, we have 30 days to hit 100%. We won't talk until then. You will get nothing new in between then. Get us to 100% or you don't get anything. Don't do that.
Yeah.
Quick question from Kelsey that we can answer quickly. Are we able to use Seed&Spark as well as investors to attain our film budget goal? Yes, you can't get investors on platform, but we know a lot of people who either use Seed&Spark like as a starting point as almost like a proof of concept for them that they are worth investing in. And we've also seen it in the opposite direction where they have like a couple small investors or maybe one big one, and then they need to supplement whatever they're getting from there with crowdfunding. So if you know investors and they're willing to give you money, they should definitely be incorporated into your budgeting process. You don't need to pick one or the other.
Yeah, and with the average numbers for crowdfunding, it is very hard, especially when we're talking about features, to really raise your entire budget through a crowdfunding campaign. The one thing you want to keep in mind if your intention is to get investors off platform is what you're giving away as incentives. Like EP credits are common, but if you have investors that are expecting those credits, you may not be able to offer them. So really have a plan and know what you're planning to do before you actually launch a campaign.
Yep. Definitely. So another question from, I think, Instagram. How do you determine if a project is necessarily meant for crowdfunding? And once you have, what is the very first step to begin the process?
I mean, I think that any project could be made or meant for crowdfunding. It's really just, do you have the ability to be candid and share stuff, visuals with your audience? There are certain projects that just can't because they have to remain under wraps for some reason, whether it's like a documentary that is very, a touchy subject and for like legal reasons needs to be really secretive, or if you have like certain actors attached and they can't have their image used because of whatever like politics happen behind the scenes. Those are situations where maybe crowdfunding isn't going to make sense because you can't have assets. You can't create assets out of your visuals, or you can't just talk about the project in the case of like the documentary example. But if you don't have restrictions like that, I think crowdfunding is just an amazing way to build an audience and to really get people excited, because you're going to be doing the thing that I really like to get across to people, and we really like to get across to people, is that all these things you do for crowdfunding, you have to do no matter what if you want eyeballs on the thing, or ears, or whatever, the creative project is.
Your
and
earballs,
so, yes.
that you use for podcasting, or earballs.
Right. So you want to really do it as soon as possible, because the sooner you start building an audience, the more likely people will feel invested enough to become your marketing team, essentially, to become the people that spread the word, that amplify all of the posts that you put out there. And so there is additional work involved. There's an additional ask involved, but it's all just marketing that you're going to have to do for the eventual thing. So everyone really should, if they can talk about it early, they should talk about it early.
And alternatively, you don't only have to crowdfund at the beginning of the process. The last thing that I crowdfunded for was back in March. Yes, during the first month that the US took coronavirus seriously. Our campaign ended a week and a half after the stay-at-home order started. that was an adventure. But we were raising for technically the distribution phase. We were going to release it online for free, but we wanted to like pay our collaborators back and like kind of pay for some of the stuff we had produced. But mostly we were crowdfunding for the marketing of it. Like we wanted to, you know, make an impact. We wanted to like let people know this thing existed. And if we could also make some money out of our essentially marketing campaign, that was kind of just a bonus. So we used our crowdfunding campaign primarily as a marketing tool and not as a fundraising tool because we'd already made the film. So depending on what stage you're at, like crowdfunding can exist for anything. There's a question later on of like, can you fundraise multiple times for the same project? Yes. And I think there's also one about like, at what stage can you crowdfund? Whenever. It totally depends. Like we had to move pretty quickly in producing the film that we made like 2 years ago. So we just did it. We didn't have time to do a crowdfunding campaign based on like how everything was coming together. But you know, so we weren't going to be able to do it for pre-production or production, but we could still incorporate it into our audience building process later. So it just depends on what you're working on.
Yeah, and in terms of stages, you know, the messaging changes a little bit based on the stage. So if it's before the thing has been made in any way, like pre-production, if we're talking film, then the messaging is, look at all these people who are ready to go. We're ready to create a thing together, and we just need your support to really make it happen. But if it's for post, then it's like, look at all the hard work that they put into this. Look at these like beautiful images that we have, but we need to hire an editor to bring it all together. We need to hire a colorist or, you know, a sound designer. And you can kind of show like before and afters. And that urgency is coming from all the work that was put in, but without this ability to get to the finish line, it will be for nothing, right? And so you're trying to just change the messaging up a little bit, but at the end of the day, it's just asking people to join you at whatever stage you're at to get you to the end. And it could be festivals, like there was one question about festivals, and it could be, look, we made this amazing, beautiful thing. Could you imagine if no one saw it? You know, like help us make sure that it gets seen. And that is the message there.
No, that's absolutely right. So here's a good kind of foundational question, also from Brimo on YouTube. What is the one thing you wish you knew the first time you did a crowdfunding campaign?
I mean, I crowdfunded in 2011 for the first time. It was very, very new. So, I mean, we talked about this last week when we talked about incentives, or the week before.
Right? Last week was senior theses.
Yeah, we talked about incentives where I offered t-shirts and wish someone had told me not to do that. Really, I would say, though, that what I wish I knew, because it was so early and I really had to figure this out through my first campaign, is that it is not asking for money. It is building an audience and asking them to join you. And I focus so much on money and like how much people have to give that I would do things that I see people do now, you know, 10 years later, and I'm like, stop doing that, such as shaming people for how they spend their money. So like, say something that I would say is, you know, for the price of a cup of coffee, you can help make this movie happen. And the intention was like, just sacrifice that cup of coffee this morning and spend it on me instead. But that shames them for how much they want to spend on their coffee. Like they should be able to do that. And it implies that people have to sacrifice in order to contribute to you. And that's totally not the message you want. It's like, have your coffee and join me in making my project. That is really what I had to learn. And I learned it the hard way, but also I learned it early because I realized that messaging made me look desperate, but I was able to turn it around.
Totally. Yeah. Co-sign everything Christina just said. I would say the other thing that I wish I knew, and I should have known it. This isn't a secret, but you should do pre-production for your crowdfunding campaign. Basically, I just I crowdfunded for the first time in 2015, and I had a totally arbitrary amount of money I wanted to raise. Like, it wasn't attached to anything. And because I was using Indiegogo and I could keep whatever I raised, it really didn't matter. So I had a completely arbitrary reason for making that amount of money. And I did not raise the amount. Let me just tell you, I think I raised like maybe a third of the goal, and it was like $3,000 or something. I didn't do any work ahead of time. I didn't ask anyone any questions. I just like, what would be funny or cool? All right, I have included it. My pitch video was like 5.5 minutes long, and I just didn't plan any of it. And so by the time we launched, like every day I had to wake up and be really desperate, like, shit, what do I say now? What can I put into the world? So having now grown up a little bit, not just in crowdfunding, but just in general, having an actual plan and like being thoughtful about what I do with my campaign, not just like making sure that nothing is arbitrary and that I have a plan in place, even if it has to change or shift a little bit, has made a huge difference. Who would have thought? Okay, another question from Kelsey. Do you have to hit your total crowdfunding goal to receive the funds, or do you get whatever's pledged regardless? So it depends on what platform you're going on. For Seed&Spark, at least, you have to hit at least 80% of your funds to be considered greenlit and get to keep them. And that's for a very specific reason. And the reason that I shouldn't have been able to keep the money I raised from my first campaign, which is if you actually need a certain amount of money to deliver on the promises you've made with your campaign. I'm going to produce this film. I'm going to submit to festivals with this film, whatever it is. If that's the actual money that you need to do that and you raise anything less than 80%, how are you actually like realistically going to follow through on that promise? How can, you be credible in that way? It doesn't really make sense.
And in the timeline that you've set, because even if you say like, okay, well, giving me, 40% is something, it's better than zero, and I can supplement it through like hustling to try and get investors or get grants, but that maybe adds like a year to your timeline of what you've promised your audience, right?
Yeah, and that's not fair to them. Basically, if you like flexible funding models for creative projects are putting entirely the burden on your supporters and the risk on your supporters and none of it on you. Because if you get to keep whatever you raise, even if it's only 5% of your budget, then they have just sunk their money into something that they're definitely not going to see in the timeline they initially expected to and may not ever see it. But you get to keep their money regardless, even though allegedly what money you needed to deliver on your promises was far, far more than what you actually received. So
it's about accountability and trust. And, I've personally crowdfunded 4 times and I've been able to go much bigger and bigger with each one. And it's because I make sure that I deliver, and I wouldn't be able to do that if I had just sort of like chosen an arbitrary number and then taken whatever I'd gotten and not fully delivered on exactly what I promised people. And obviously there's flexibility, like things change and certain things happen outside of your control. But in terms of like what you're spending money on and what you need, that should really line up with what you're telling people. And raising in stages is always an option. So like if you don't feel confident that you can raise the entire amount you need in one campaign, you can always break it up. So at least you're like setting markers for people. Like this amount of money is going to get me right here. And then I'm going to come back and ask for more to get me here. Right. Yeah. And so you're being clear and communicative with people.
Yeah, just be transparent. I think even during crowdfunding, I think people get like very uncomfortable talking about money and like what things cost. But we just in general as a culture need to get more comfortable talking about money because like capitalism wants us to stay quiet so that we can't help each other. But also like the more transparent you are with people, the more they trust you, the more credible you seem, and the more you're able to get away with some flexibility if challenges arise. So the more transparent you are about what things are going to cost, what the timeline is, what your plans are, and if/when things go wrong, it's filmmaking, it's creativity, things are going to happen, the more people will still be willing to sign on and join you and be a part of the process.
Yeah, and just to add a little, so Kickstarters is all or nothing. You do have to hit your goal. Most other platforms are completely flexible. Ours is 80%, as Bree said, because we do want to give you a little bit of that flexibility, right? We understand that, filmmakers or creative artists are resourceful, right? So we can kind of have a little bit of flexibility there and still deliver, but too much and you end up kind of ruining your ability to come back and ask for more from that audience.
Totally. So question from Serena, will Seed&Spark charge me extra for using a fiscal sponsor? No, but the fiscal sponsor probably will.
Yeah. And just in terms of that, like thinking about what the average numbers are through a crowdfunding campaign in terms of contributions. And usually it's somewhere between, $25 and $100. And most people contributing at those levels would not really care about the tax deduction that is potentially coming through there. So unless you have like an audience that you anticipate that would really give a lot through a crowdfunding campaign, we generally would recommend that you have a fiscal sponsor that maybe you can direct large contributions to, but it's often not so useful on the platform itself.
Yeah, unless you are like an international project and you need like a Canadian or US bank account, that would be a reason to use a fiscal sponsor. As Christina said, if you have a couple of like really rich people who are like, I give you money, but only if it's tax deductible, that's fair too. And finally, I would say if there is a fiscal sponsor that you are intimately familiar with that is thematically aligned with the thing that you're making, like if you're a documentary filmmaker, for example, and they're going to not only be your fiscal sponsor and help out with like the tax stuff, but also be like a promotional partner, that makes a lot of sense. But if you just want a fiscal sponsor to be able to say it's tax deductible, unless somebody is like multiple people have said, I will give you a lot of money if it's tax deductible, it's probably not worth it.
Yep.
Brimo, I know you asked a bunch of good questions. I'm going to try to get to a couple other people, but don't worry, Brimo, I am paying attention to the questions that you asked. Tony asks, can I, oh wait, no, we already,
Jill,
oh wait.
I think Jill, no.
Yeah, Jill has some questions. Kelsey asked if there's a certain amount of time to use the funds raised. No, but be communicative. Again, just be transparent.
Yeah. Also, just from a tax perspective, we generally advise that you raise in the year that you plan to spend the money. There are definitely ways that a tax professional could work with you to like figure that out, but I think it's a little bit more of a headache. So maybe it makes sense to like delay a crowdfunding campaign to the beginning of next year instead of late this year if you're planning to actually spend it all next year. But we are not tax professionals, so definitely seek out.
Please don't ask us. Math is not why we became filmmakers, for the record. Actually, there's a couple of Brimo questions that I think we can knock through pretty quickly. We don't need to bring them up on screen. Is there a limited amount of time that you can have your campaign run? On Seed&Spark, it's 30, 45, or 60 days. We recommend 30 days for most people because it's enough time to get the word out, but not so much time that you're floundering and lose momentum.
Oh, that's to the previous question. That's something I wish I knew when I first crowdfunded, not to do a 60-day campaign because it was exhausting.
Yeah, unless you have like a big team, like 5 or more people actively full-time working on the campaign and have like live events planned that you're going to do at like the 30-day mark, the 45-day mark, whatever, it's going to be too much time. The way that momentum dies is when you don't have new things to say, and the longer you're crowdfunding for, the more new things you have to say to keep things going every single day. And it's just too much. Don't do that.
It's too much for you, and it's too much for your audience. Even the people that were really excited at the beginning are just going to be like worn out by the middle of it.
Yeah, at a certain point, you just need to chill out. Brimo also asks, what are some good incentives that we can give away that don't take away from the production budget? Check out our full Lunch and Learn on the subject of incentives, both what you should give away, what you shouldn't give away, and the psychology of supporters. Check out our previous Lunch and Learn. Okay, so question from Jill. I'm trying to decide when to launch the 45-day campaign for my doc, Snowland, before or after the election, before, through, or after the holidays, around Mercury in retrograde. So timing, especially starting right now, is going to become a thing. I can't speak to election fundraising periods, so Christina, definitely weigh in on that because I think you have opinions. In terms of in general, though, once it hits like mid-October, it's really hard to crowdfund. Mid-October through like the first 2 weeks of January are kind of a dead zone because it's holidays. Even amidst a pandemic, people are traveling, people are off work, so they're not at their computers as often. They've already spent money on charitable donations, on, gifts for friends and family, depending on what holidays they celebrate, that kind of stuff. So it's a really, really uphill battle in a way that is distinct from any other uphill battle that you're going to fight in crowdfunding. So don't do that to yourself.
Yeah, I think that, so it very much depends, because if you're making something that is relevant to like Halloween, for instance, then it does make sense to crowdfund in that period because you can probably get a lot more press than you normally would outside of that window. So thinking about that, but generally you do want to steer clear of like mid-November onward through January. And in terms of the election, I do think you're going to have a harder time, especially this year, kind of breaking through a lot of just like noise and good stuff and bad stuff on social media. And also just like people's inboxes, they're probably getting a lot of political emails. Like mine are totally ramping up right now in my inbox. And so I'm like less inclined to pay attention to like newsletter type stuff. So yeah, I think that really waiting, if you can wait, you'll be better off, especially to my previous point. If you're not planning to make the film at the end of this year, then you're better off waiting until 2021.
Yeah. Yep, definitely, definitely. Jillian asks, what are some campaign pledge examples you've seen or had success with? I assume you mean incentives, so we already answered that question. Amanda Taylor asks a great question. How do you get your cast and crew to help with crowdfunding? And if it's not your first crowdfund, how do you expand donors beyond your personal sphere since they've already given a couple of times? So in terms of getting cast and crew to help, we actually have an entire article about how to motivate teammates to share and help out with the crowdfunding campaign, which we will post in the comments as well as in the description box once I get around to updating the description box for this video when I'm not literally on camera. The high levels from that article takeaways are being really honest with your team and letting them be really honest with you about like what they're interested in, what their capacity is, what they have time for, what they like want to work on, and what they think their skill sets are like best implemented towards, and focusing on that. Not everyone is going to have the same like amount of work on your crowdfunding campaign page, but that's true for any amount of filmmaking. Like the first AD is doing a different kind of work and different amounts of work as the lead actor, you know, or as a background extra. It doesn't mean that anyone is less important than anyone else. It just means that they have different things, different roles that they're taking up. So don't expect everyone to be as in as you are, especially if you're like the creator of the project. You're always going to be the most bought in to your film. Even if you have a creative partner, you know, whatever, if you are the person who created this thing, you're going to be more obsessed than everyone else, and everyone else is going to look like they haven't done anything. So remind yourself that that's not true. You just need to relax. So that's kind of the high level stuff.
Yeah. Just want to add one thing. Also remember to frame it like audience building for them, because that's what it is. And at the end of the day, eyeballs on the thing we're all making together benefits everyone. It's not just like trying to find funding in a traditional sense. You're not asking them to like knock on doors with investors and have private meetings. You're asking them to help build the audience for the eventual thing. And that may help them feel more comfortable sharing it more often. And just to add to that, highlighting their role as much as possible is really important. So it's not just like you and your vision and the constant sharing of like me, I, me, you know, it's us and we, and this person is the first AC, and like, here's a shot of them doing their job and a little bit about them. That kind of stuff can go a long way.
Totally. Yeah. And let them like, let them feel comfortable bringing in ideas of their own. Like, do they want to program a fun live stream, you know, where your production designer talks through some of the elements that they've already bought for one of the scenes? Like, you know, if you're making a period piece, like what research have they already done? Can they share that? Like, let them be a part of it in whatever way they want. And if they feel ownership over the materials being shared, and like Christina said, understand this is about just getting people excited and not about like, why haven't you called your grandma? Why hasn't she given us a check yet? Like, as long as if it's not like that, people are a lot more willing to get weird and creative with it. So like, give them that space. And then in terms of if it's not your first crowdfund, how should you expand donors? Well, you should be expanding donors or pledges or contributors regardless. But that's kind of the work that you do in between campaigns. So like, you shouldn't expect once you launch a campaign for that to be like the beginning of your audience building. That's a step along the way. Your audience building should be happening outside in between. And so that's what we were kind of talking about with like the hyping before the campaign. That's audience building. Crowdfunding will help accelerate to a certain extent because there's like a thing happening with like a timeline. But ultimately, audience building is a year-round exercise. Crowdfunding is just a step along that path.
Yeah, and if you haven't taken our Crowdfunding to Build Independence workshop, we do an exercise in that helps you really identify who your audience is and where they are and how to engage them and reach them so that you're not just friend and family funding.
Because you shouldn't be, because it's hard. And Brimo asked another question earlier on about like who is working on the campaign. Is it just the cast and crew? Mostly, yes, but we've also had people who crowdfund that have like family members on board. You know, like during the summer, I know there was at least 2 campaigns where like younger cousins were helping out randomly. Like multiple campaigns mentioned this to me, who were like really good on social media, and so they would have like, you know, a younger cousin who's like a preteen teenager, like help manage that side of things. So like anyone who's invested in your vision and wants to help out and has a skill that they can offer you, yeah, invite them on. But usually it's going to be like producers, key cast and crew, and folks of that nature who are going to be like actively running the campaign alongside you. Okay, question from Andrew. Oh, yeah, we just answered that. Andrew answered their own question. So Andrew does ask, is it best to be transparent if crowdfunding during post-production. No, that doesn't make sense. Okay. How do you incentivize support during the post-production phase? It seems like sneak peeks are less exciting if you're already showing off what you've made. That's a good question.
Yeah. I find that with post-production, the best thing that you can do is show what work there still is to be done, because a lot of people who don't work in, and I always default to film, but I'm sure this translates to other areas, but if people who don't make film, they don't know what post-production is, right? They don't know like what makes a sound mix and what color grading is, right? And so if you can show them, and it's like, yes, it looks done because we shot it and we have footage, but look at how it could look when I throw some color grading on it, like a before and after. If you've ever watched like a colorist's reel, they do a really cool kind of, they take one like shot that's running across the screen and then slowly put the color over it, and you see how it transforms. You can do the same thing with music. You can do the same thing with a sound mix. You can, with like ambient sound, you can educate your audience to show that this is like one clip that's been untouched. Here's what it could be if we had the money to do it to the whole film, right?
Yeah, and like if people are invested in the idea, then like a sneak peek is exciting, but ultimately if they're excited to watch the film and you're telling them this is what it's going to take for you to actually be able to watch the film, then they're in for that. And then in terms of like individual incentives and like what to excite people with, definitely check out our previous Lunch and Learn. But yeah, ultimately the end goal for everyone is to watch a finished film. So if this is the money that it's going to take to have a finished film for them to watch, people will be on board.
And also they want to feel part of making something. And just because you've already made it doesn't mean that you can't give them that experience still. And when you think about going into making your project, things that you would have to have for an EPK, an electronic press kit, you can utilize for a campaign. So like shoot some behind the scenes videos and interviews with the cast and crew and put that out for the people that are now learning about it through a crowdfunding campaign, because that still will make them feel like they were part of the experience.
Totally. Kelsey asks, are you able to change the total amount for your budget goal after you've launched? Like if a grant comes through that you weren't expecting, so you don't need the full amount asking for? Not on Seed&Spark, just because that would obviously open up a lot of like, it looks like we're not going to be successful, so we're just going to like lower our goal to what we have already raised. However, you can always like loan yourself the amount that you're getting through the grant, or, you know, just put that money directly into the campaign. Like there are ways to manage it if unexpected money comes through. You just need to be transparent with your audience, so they're not like, oh wow, did somebody just give you like $5,000? And you can announce, hey, we got a grant, so we are now this much closer to our goal. But yeah, you can't actually lower the amount, but you can contribute the amount to yourself to like show off.
You can also say like, hey, we still need this full amount, but instead of allocating the funds here, now we're going to, you know, take us to another stage because we got this extra funding. So now like these things that were supposed to be for production are now for post. And you can put that in your story section and in an update.
Totally. So Andrew has another question about timing. Is there a good specific time to crowdfund relative to festival submission season?
That's interesting. It's hard to say because festivals, if you're crowdfunding for post and you're trying to make those deadlines, then maybe. But it's harder to line up a crowdfunding campaign with submission deadlines, just because like who knows when you're actually going to finish the thing and if that will make sense. But festivals generally tend to stay open for, usually like the big ones are open for kind of the spring into fall season situation, and then they actually happen in the winter. So you have like your Sundances and your South bys, right? But there are festivals happening all year round, and fall tends to be a really popular season as well for regional festivals. And so it's sort of the opposite window. There really isn't like, again, a one size fits all. It really is planning ahead to like put together a festival strategy, put together a list of festivals that you want to submit to, and know those deadlines and maybe coordinate that way.
Yeah, I would definitely say plan ahead of time, and plan ahead of time specifically for early bird submissions, so that you know like when the first submissions are coming in at the cheapest prices, so that you can get in early. Like if you like use that like the first early bird thing that you want to submit to as your timeline, and you'll be fine. And then you'll just have the money in the bank for the next couple. And if you plan ahead of time, you can use that as part of your crowdfund. Like, hey, these are the 7 festivals that we want to submit to. Here is why, you know, things like that.
Also know that if you are raising specifically for money to submit, like for the submission fees, and you have a deadline coming up pretty soon after the campaign, you want to build in maybe like 2 weeks to make sure that the funds actually transfer, so that you're not missing that deadline because you didn't get the money yet.
Yeah. Also remember that like in any campaign, there's going to be at least a handful of like decline charges just from like people whose card expired in between the time that they actually pledged and when it gets like taken from their account. You know, somebody maybe overdrew from their account 1 month. If they gave a lot of money, sometimes banks will like flag it automatically as a scam, and they have to like manually say, no, it's cool, I wanted to give them this much money. So, you know, things go wrong all the time. So as with everything, plan a buffer in. Don't like ride right up against when you need to start spending the money, both because you're not going to get all of the money immediately as soon as you need it if you give yourself too little time. But also that's very stressful. Like sometimes people ask us questions about like timing between production and crowdfunding. And I always recommend do not crowdfund up until production, because you're doing pre-production and crowdfunding at the same time, and you're going to lose your freaking mind. So give yourself, I usually say like a month, so that you have some breather, you have time for the money to come through and to actually dedicate time to pre-production and not to crowdfunding. But yeah, the more time you can give yourself, the better. Just with everything.
Yeah.
Just with everything. So Jillian Leslie asks if they can raise the amount needed, or should you start an additional campaign for posts? So it depends on what is realistic for you. Like, you know, depending on the budget of your film, if it's reasonable for you to fundraise for the entire process, pre all the way to post and festivals, like great, fundraise for that. But that's not always the case for people, especially if it's their first campaign or if it's for a larger project, things like that. And so if it is not realistic based on, you know, the audience building that you've done, the email list that you have accrued, like all of that kind of stuff, then staged fundraising is great. But if it is realistic, yeah, you know, cut out the middleman, just do one campaign.
Yeah. I was just going to say, just to plug our feedback process, we help you figure that out too. So like I assume the follow-up question would be, well, how do I know if my goal is realistic? And that's part of what we do if you use our platform.
Yeah. Yeah. And we actually have like an article that I'm sending to our social person right now, because I have a keyboard shortcut to put it in. But we actually have like a little averages formula that we can share in the comments in a second. And the averages formula like isn't obviously an exact thing, but it takes like the average contribution, the average amount of people who contribute from your email list, and kind of give you a starting point of like, this is how much money you probably have already. And if that's not at least 30% of your total goal, then it might be worth making your goal a little bit smaller. And of course, depending on how many times you've crowdfunded, if you have a pretty large audience and the amount individual people are going to be contributing, that's going to shift slightly, but at least it gives you a place to start. The averages formula is now in the YouTube chat, and it will also be included in the video description eventually. So great question. Question from Kelsey, can you make more than your goal amount? Let's say you plan on crowdfunding in phases, but it takes off and people are able to give more than the goal amount. You absolutely can. And at that point, you start to implement what's called stretch goals, which we also have an article for. The stretch goals are very common. I crowdfund for relatively small amounts, especially in comparison to like Christina and other people. But my campaign back in 2018 hit 100% funded for a relatively small goal, because we were doing another kind of marketing campaign within 15 hours, and we still had 29 days of crowdfunding to go. So we implemented a series of stretch goals that said, okay, well, if we raise this amount over our goal, we'll be able to do X, Y, Z. So they were things like we were going to start a companion podcast at a certain amount. We were going to do a full cast photo shoot for a certain amount so that we had more promotional material, stuff like that. Like, we should have planned it better to start out with, but it was a very fun way to continue raising above our goal. We ended up raising 253% of our goal, which it was a very small goal, so don't get too excited. But as long as you have like a clear thing that you're continuing to raise for, and you communicate that clearly, and you make the process fun, you can absolutely raise more than 100% of your crowdfunding goals.
Yep.
And you should always plan for that. Always plan to be wildly successful, but be realistic so that if you're not, you're still going to be good.
Yeah. Also, just to for my own, I've usually gotten around 120% in most of my campaigns, and that's because 100 is like the goal for me. 80%, the cushion exists, but the way that I mentally approach it is like, I'm getting to 100 because that's what I need. And so my messaging is always like, this is bare minimum. This bare minimum is what will get us this. If we raise $1 more, it will help go towards all of these other things that we need to do too.
Yep. And we'll share an article that kind of walks you through how best to prepare for that, how best to communicate that, things of that nature. So Sky has a question. What are the most effective elements you've seen the most successful crowdfunding campaigns use? I think use is what the last word's supposed to be. So as always, one size doesn't fit all, but I would say the people who have the most creative interpretation of like the standard best practices that we give out. If you go to our, crowdfunding workshop we give, if you watch our other Lunch and Learns, like, we give a lot of general good advice, but the more creative you get with that good advice, like with the spirit of the advice, if not the letter of the law, those are generally the more successful campaigns, because they're clearly taking it seriously, not just as a fundraiser, but as an audience building exercise, because the people who are really creative are in it to win it. They're not just looking to raise money, because it's a lot of effort to just raise money. So those generally are more successful.
And they're getting really specific to who their audience is, right? They're not just sort of like replicating our suggestions, but they're thinking seriously about how these suggestions apply to what their audience wants and needs.
Yeah, I would also say that they remind themselves that they are themselves targets of crowdfunding campaigns. So like, they build campaigns that they would want to contribute to. And that gets lost a lot, I think, especially in newer people's campaigns, that we forget that we aren't, Tarantino. Like, nobody wants a signed script from us, because except for our grandma, and she would be fine just giving us $50 even without the signed script. So like, designing a campaign that you, if you were a total stranger, would still be interested in is a really, really big part of it. Making it specific to the group of people that are going to care the most about this film. Peter asks, excuse me if you've run through this before they logged in. Welcome, better late than never. Do you have any statistics on success rates for campaigns associated with different dollar amounts?
We don't have specific dollar amounts on our platform or in general. We do know that the average raise for film across all platforms tends to be $10,000 or less than $10,000 across all platforms. On ours, it's a bit higher at $12,000. But even so, that's not a lot of money when it comes to filmmaking. We don't know the stats for other verticals, but they aren't much higher. I would say they're actually lower, especially if we're talking like a comic book or something like that. The success rate on our platform is 80%. That is just a general success rate across the board. It's twice any other platform. But as far as actual dollar amounts, I don't know if that varies, like between 10,000 and 20,000.
Slightly. I think there's like a 5 to 7% difference. Like, when you get above 25K, I think it drops to like 75% successful. But like, the principles of what makes a good and realistic campaign don't change regardless of how much money you're raising. Like, obviously, if you're raising $500 and you don't raise $500, it's uncommon, whereas it's more common to want to raise $25,000 and not. But because of our feedback process, because of the education that we put in, because of the fact that we will not approve you for launch until we collectively agree, both as a team at Seed&Spark and between the team and the filmmakers and the team making the project, that they are ready, they're not going to launch. So, our success rate is pretty consistent regardless of dollar amount.
Yep.
Somebody asked if we were a 501c3. We are not. We are definitely a for-profit business.
I don't know of any crowdfunding platforms that are.
Is GoFundMe? Probably not.
I don't think so.
I think that they're still for profit. Yeah, let's see. I think we had some other questions that came in prior to this. So remember to add more questions. We got 10 more minutes to answer them. But question from someone before this, how do you decide to do one crowdfunding campaign? Oh, nope, we already did that one. How do you choose the amount to crowdfund for is a question that came through earlier. We get this question a lot, and it should not be an arbitrary amount. We already kind of said that, but definitely have a budget. What amount of money do you need to make this project as good as you want to make it? That should be your budget. And you can split that up if you need to, or raise for it all at once, depending. Oh, good question about momentum. How do you keep momentum going and making sure people don't get tired of your crowdfunding posts?
So that's sort of the pre-production part of it, right? It's like you want to have, that you have to engage people for, let's say, 30 days straight, and just repeating the same message over and over is not going to do it. They're going to get tired. You're going to get tired. And so you want to plan a whole bunch of stuff as much as possible in advance, and really have it ready to go so that you're not creating things during the campaign, you're just executing. And so meet the cast videos. If you have like a really cool location, put together a video of the tech scout or some photos of it. Just generally look for visual, engaging things that you can put out as updates throughout the campaign to keep momentum going, to show progress, especially because even if you're not doing pre-production while doing the campaign, pre-production for the film or project, you can kind of create the idea that you are, and it's like, look how we're building money through our crowdfunding campaign, and the more progress we make there, the more progress we make with making the actual thing, right? Or hiring people. We've cast, like, you don't announce your cast maybe until you have a week into it, and it's like, here, meet our lead actor or meet our ensemble. And also events. Events are a great thing, and we did do a lunch and learn on events a while back. So they can be live events or they could be virtual events, but they're a great way to keep people excited and to kind of get like a new sense of life to a campaign that's maybe in that middle slump.
Yeah, basically the key to maintaining momentum is having new things to say, because if the only thing that you're posting is, hey, I'm crowdfunding, give me money. Hey, I'm crowdfunding, give me money. Like, people are going to filter that out. It's the same reason that people have most of their car crashes around like the 3 blocks around their home. And it's because your brain filters out information it's already seen before. And when an unfamiliar thing happens, it can sometimes take your brain a little longer to process it. And the same is true if you're posting the same crowdfunding post over and over again. So have updates, have announcements, hold back a couple of your incentives to share in weeks 2 or 3, like have something else to be talking about that still filters people back to your campaign, but isn't just, I'm campaigning, like, trick them, basically, give them a filter, like give them something else to talk about.
And a big part of this process is educating audiences on what actually goes into making the thing you're making. And so showing them that, like, I'm not just asking you for money because I want to put it in my pocket. It's because I actually have to pay people, and I have to feed people, and I have to pay to rent stuff. And so, like, showing them that as much as possible will get them to also just be bigger amplifiers for the campaign itself.
Totally. So we had a question from Serena who asked, someone mentioned a grant. So the reason that they asked if we were a 501c3 is that usually grants are given to a 501c3. So nobody's giving a grant to Seed&Spark. You might have just applied for a grant separately, and that money comes in while you're crowdfunding. So like that's why we talked about the different ways that you can manage that with your messaging, with everything else. But the grant isn't actually coming through Seed&Spark. You can only contribute with a credit card. You can't even do like a check or a PayPal link or anything like that. You can't cash app a Seed&Spark campaign. So don't worry about the 501c3 thing. That would be a separate issue.
Also, just like real talk. I don't think that anyone should be putting their own money into a campaign. And so, because you're going to pay a fee on that, we do take anywhere between 2 and 5%, depending, and we can explain that if that is a question. But generally, if you've gotten money outside of the platform, great. Put it in the bank account for your project and keep hustling to hit your goal with other money on the campaign itself.
Yep. have another question from before, which is, should I post about my crowdfunding on my personal accounts or only on the accounts for the project? So we actually have a whole Lunch and Learn about social media for crowdfunding, where we kind of break down the personal versus professional social media accounts that you should definitely check out. Christina, do you remember like the high level takeaways from that?
Okay, so it really depends, because it depends on if you're comfortable being like a brand yourself. You know, if you are very vocal about your work and your audience on your own account, then it maybe makes sense to do that. We generally recommend, like both Brie and I have a Twitter account for our production companies and for ourselves, and our films or projects, series, more in the case of Brie, are hashtags. And so we kind of have like that separation. The general thing you want to keep in mind is that there is an end to the life of a film or even a series. And you want to make sure that you're not just going to have that be a dead account once it's over. So if you can roll it into your next project, if you stick to one genre or like one style and you can just change that handle to your new thing, great. But it can get out of hand when you have too many accounts to manage. And the worst thing, I think, worse than not having an account at all is having just like a dead account that hasn't been updated in years. And so my general advice is to maybe start with your own and then branch out, which is how I did it. I built an audience for myself, and then I was like, okay, now I'm going to be like really political on my own account, but I'm only going to talk about my films on my production company. So if you're into following me for that reason, go over here and follow that. But it can vary. Like I also have a lot of projects in the works at once, so it doesn't make sense for me to have multiple accounts per project.
Yeah, especially if you're making shorts and like web series and things that end after a little bit. So we have several questions about our fee structure, and we threw the FAQ link about the breakdown of crowdfunding fees in, but we've still got requests for, hey, what are your fees though, for real? So to break it down, like I think all of the other major crowdfunding platforms, our base platform fee, so the amount that we as Seed&Spark take out of your money personally, is a 5% fee. However, we are the only platform that offers the supporter the option to cover the fee for you. So what that means is that if somebody grabs like your $10 incentive, which is usually like a social media shout out incentive, pro tip, on any other platform, you would get $9.50 of that, minus, of course, credit card fees that we can't control. But on Seed&Spark, we actually offer the supporter the option to add 50 cents to their fee. They'd pay us $10.50, and then you would get the full $10 from that amount. So that's where the kind of variable fee comes in. Like for my last campaign, 89% of my supporters chose to cover the filmmaking fee for me. So the actual money that Seed&Spark took out of my final raised amount was 0.5%. So I actually had a 0.5%, less than a single percentage, taken out of my total from Seed&Spark fees because so many people chose to cover it. And because, like Christina mentioned earlier, most contributions are going to be between $100 and $25. The actual 5% for individual contributions is fairly low, which is why on average, I think about 66% of people choose to cover that, which is why we quote it at 2 to 5%. But depending on who contributes to you, you might end up with an even lower amount.
Yeah. And it's pre-selected when they check out. So it's also like if they're not even paying attention, they might just not even notice it and check out, and they've just covered it, right? So there's a little bit of psychology there that we're playing with. Also, just to make it clear, we and all other platforms also have a credit card processing fee that we don't take. It is our credit card processor. We all use the same one. That is like about 3%. I think it ends up equaling about 3%. So even if 100% of people covered the platform fee, which is the Seed&Spark fee, you would still lose about 3% to the credit card processor, regardless of what platform you use.
Yeah. So that's why we try to be very clear about our platform fee is the thing that ends up being much lower than anyone else. But the credit card fee is consistent across all the platforms because we literally all use the same payment processor. So the fees for us and anyone else would be the same, but the actual platform fee is much lower. And that, especially when you're starting to raise more and more amounts, it makes a big difference.
So also just to kind of add to that, we generally recommend that you budget for that. So let's say you like plan to lose 8% of that money and build it into the amount you're asking for. And worst case is you lose all of that 8%, and best case you lose a lot less, which is often the case.
Totally. So we are at 4 p.m. now. So unless anyone has like a question that didn't get answered that I missed, because there have been so many great questions today, I believe we're going to start wrapping it up. So as I mentioned, whether you're watching live or as a video on demand, we will eventually be adding all of the links we talked about in today's workshop, as well as some additional ones that we thought would be helpful into the video description. And if you found this workshop today, this AMA, whatever we're calling it officially, valuable, we would really love if you could support us in continuing to bring you all of this free, cool education. So we're going to drop a link both in the video description and in the chat for our Pay What You Can link to help us continue to bring awesome free educational programming to you and all of your filmmaking and creator friends. And in terms of what comes next in our free education system, well, let me tell you. So tomorrow, actually, I will be leading an Art of the Pitch workshop. So we will be talking about developing the concise way that you talk about your work. And you'll find that on Eventbrite. It's going to be at 4 p.m. Eastern Time tomorrow, brought to you by the Austin Film Society, Chicago Film Office, and the Mescla Media Collective. So thanks so much to those folks for bringing it to us. On Monday, we've got the Crowdfunding to Build Independence workshop that we mentioned a couple of times in this for the Black Femme Supremacy Film Festival. And then next Friday, we have our latest creative sustainability session, which will be about narrative as resistance from Fanshin Cox. So talking about, incorporating activism into your narrative, whether you're doing fiction or nonfiction, I assume. And that'll be on Friday, September 18th at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. So we'll have those links in the live chat. Looks like we already do. So if you are interested in what we're doing next, definitely RSVP. If you're interested in what we've already given, we'd love for you to pay what you can to help us continue doing so. And thank you so much again for all of your amazing questions.
Yeah, thank you. Bye.